A veteran witnesses a homeless boy sharing his meager meal with a stray dog, moved by this act of kindness. He offers a quiet gift that transforms the boy's life forever. Arthur Hayes had long stopped expecting surprises. His days were mostly a blur, one fading into the next, indistinguishable from the last. At 72, with the weight of years and memories on his shoulders, life had become a series of predictable motions, morning walks, chess games with other veterans, and moments of reflection on a past that now seemed like someone else's. The medals he once wore with pride had gathered dust, and the man he had been during his service seemed distant, lost somewhere between the battlefields of his youth and the silence of his old age. But there was something about this cold, early morning that felt different. Arthur sat on his usual park bench, his cane resting beside him, a thermos of coffee in his hand. He watched the world go by, the bustle of the downtown bakery across the street. The bakery's familiar smells of freshly baked bread and pastries filled the air, a reminder of simpler times, before the war, before the loneliness. Arthur had come to enjoy the rhythm of these quiet mornings, where nothing unexpected ever seemed to happen. Yet, as the sun barely peeked over the horizon, he saw a movement at the edge of his vision that made him stop. Under the bridge that led to the small park, there sat a boy. Arthur squinted through the fog, trying to make out the child's figure. He couldn't have been more than 11 or 12, skinny, with unkempt hair and clothes that looked like they'd been through too much for too long. The boy had a dirty backpack that was nearly as big as he was, and he seemed to be alone, the only other living thing beside him a stray dog curled up beside him. Arthur's heart twinged with a strange mix of pity and concern. He didn't recognize the boy. He hadn't seen him before, and he wondered why the child was out here, especially at such an early hour. Arthur's eyes lingered on him for a moment, then froze, his attention suddenly caught by what the boy was doing. The kid, with shaking hands, unwrapped a half-eaten sandwich and carefully tore it in two. He gave the larger half to the dog, who wagged its tail vigorously and accepted the gift as if it were the most precious thing in the world. Arthur's chest tightened. He couldn't remember the last time he had seen such an act of selflessness. The boy had nearly nothing, and yet he had shared what little he had. For the first time in years, something stirred in Arthur. It wasn't the loneliness he had grown accustomed to. It was something else, something sharp, something deeply human. It reminded him of his own son, who had passed away so long ago. Arthur watched the scene unfold, unsure of what to do. He felt an odd sense of connection to this boy, someone who, like the soldiers he had once served with, seemed to carry a quiet strength within him. Even without words, Arthur could see it, the resilience, the ability to endure despite everything life had thrown at him. He saw it in the way the boy gently stroked the dog, as if he were trying to offer some comfort to the creature that, like him, had been abandoned by the world. Taking a deep breath, Arthur stood up, his stiff joints protesting, and slowly made his way across the park. His steps were slow, deliberate, the sound of his cane tapping against the pavement echoing in the quiet morning air. The boy didn't seem to notice him approach. When Arthur reached the boy's side, he hesitated for a moment before speaking. The words came out softly, but they carried a weight that surprised even him. "You hungry?" Arthur asked, his voice rough from years of disuse. The boy looked up at him, startled. His wide eyes took in the sight of the elderly man standing before him, and for a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, slowly, the boy nodded. It wasn't a wide grin or an expression of joy, but the faintest acknowledgement that something, however small, had shifted between them. Arthur fumbled with his thermos, pouring some water into the small plastic cup he had brought along. He handed it to the boy, who took it without a word. They sat there together in the quiet of the park, the stray dog resting its head on the boy's knee, and the world moved on around them, oblivious to the unlikely bond forming between the two strangers. As they sat, Arthur learned the boy's name, Caleb, and the story behind his eyes, those eyes that held a depth far beyond his years. Caleb hadn't asked for help. He didn't complain. Instead, he simply spoke in quiet, measured tones about how he had run away from an abusive foster home 3 months ago. His voice was soft, but there was a strength in it, a fortitude that Arthur could feel in every word. Caleb didn't beg for pity. He didn't even want anyone to feel sorry for him. He simply existed, much like the dog at his side, surviving, waiting for something to change. Arthur listened intently, the weight of his own past pressing down on him. He understood the boy's silence, the silence that spoke louder than any words could. It was the same silence Arthur had lived with for so many years, the kind that came after loss, after seeing too much, after realizing that the world didn't always care about the people who needed help the most. And yet, there was something about Caleb's quiet strength that moved him. It was familiar. It was like the men he had fought alongside, soldiers who had carried wounds, both physical and emotional, but never showed them. As the minutes passed, Arthur found himself feeling a strange sense of comfort. He didn't need to fix Caleb's problems. He didn't even know how to. But he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't just walk away and leave the boy to fend for himself. The world had already taken so much from Caleb. Arthur wasn't going to let it take any more. That night, as Arthur lay in bed, the quiet of his small apartment settling around him, he couldn't sleep. His thoughts raced, his mind replaying the image of the boy under the bridge, his selfless act of sharing, his quiet acceptance of the world's harshness. Arthur knew, deep in his gut, that something had shifted in him. He couldn't let this boy fall through the cracks. Not again. He had to do something, even if it was just a small gesture. A gesture that might, just maybe, change the course of Caleb's life. The next morning, as the first light of day filtered through the blinds, Arthur made a decision. He wouldn't wait for things to change on their own. He would be the one to make that change. He would find Caleb and make sure he had a chance at something more than what the world had already given him. Arthur didn't know exactly how he was going to do it, but he knew one thing. He wasn't going to let Caleb slip away. The next morning, Arthur Hayes set out with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. For the first time in a long time, he was determined to make a difference, not just in his own life, but in someone else's. He packed a small duffel bag with essentials. A couple of pairs of warm socks, a clean shirt, toiletries, and a fresh sandwich. He wanted to be ready to offer Caleb the help he needed. There was a glimmer of hope in Arthur now, something he hadn't allowed himself to feel for years. As Arthur reached the park, his eyes scanned the area where he had found Caleb the previous day. He expected to see the boy sitting near the bridge, maybe petting the dog Max like he had before. But the spot was empty. His heart skipped a beat. He hadn't seen Caleb since yesterday, and now he couldn't even find him. Arthur's pace quickened, his thoughts racing. He checked the nearby street corners and asked a few vendors if they'd seen the boy, but there was no sign of him. Then, as he rounded a corner, he spotted Max. The dog lay curled up next to a trash bin, looking up at Arthur with sad eyes. Arthur's stomach twisted. He approached cautiously, calling out for Caleb, but there was no reply. His heart pounded in his chest, and his mind went into overdrive. What if something had happened to the boy? What if he had gotten into trouble? What if Arthur had waited too long? But before Arthur could spiral any further, he saw him, Caleb. The boy stumbled toward him, limping and covered in bruises. His clothes were dirty, and his face showed the signs of a struggle. Arthur's hands trembled as he rushed to him, the fear and concern in his chest flooding his entire body. "What happened?" Arthur asked, his voice a mixture of worry and disbelief. Caleb winced but tried to smile, his expression guarded. He shrugged slightly. "A group of older kids," he said, his voice shaky. "They stole my backpack, said they'd call the cops if I came back. I tried to fight them off, but they got me good." Arthur's jaw tightened with anger, but he kept his voice calm. "Let's get you somewhere safe." He helped Caleb to his feet, steadying him as they walked together toward the shelter. As they moved through the streets, Arthur couldn't help but feel a wave of guilt crash over him. He had promised Caleb safety, and now, here he was, injured and alone again. The world had a way of throwing obstacles in front of people who least deserved it, and Caleb, despite his quiet strength, was no exception. That evening, Arthur brought Caleb to the local shelter, run by an old friend who had transitioned from serving in the military to serving those in need. His friend had always been passionate about helping youth who had no place to turn. After some quiet conversation and assurances, they agreed to take Caleb in. The shelter had room for him, a warm bed, meals, and no questions asked. Caleb didn't need to explain his situation. He was given the space to heal. For the next few weeks, Arthur visited daily. He'd bring Caleb books, teach him how to play chess, and listen as Caleb slowly began to open up about his life. It wasn't much, just small conversations here and there, but Arthur could see the boy's guard slowly coming down. Caleb had suffered more than most people ever would, yet he never asked for sympathy. He never complained. The boy was stronger than Arthur could have ever imagined. Then, one day, Caleb didn't show up at the shelter. Arthur's heart sank the moment he realized the boy was missing. He had grown fond of Caleb in a way he hadn't let himself grow fond of anyone in years. The absence felt like an aching void, a hole that Arthur knew he had to fill. He called around, asking if anyone had seen the boy. He checked the streets, the alleys, the places Caleb had mentioned during their talks. But there was no sign of him. Arthur's worry deepened. Had Caleb run away again? Had something gone terribly wrong? 3 days passed before Arthur received a phone call. He was in the middle of a chess match with one of the veterans when the phone rang. He picked it up, a knot in his stomach. The voice on the other end was calm, but there was an air of urgency. "Arthur Hayes?" the voice asked. "This is Linda from the public library. We've got a young boy here who's filled out a scholarship application. His name is Caleb. He's listed you as his guardian." Arthur blinked, not understanding. "What? A scholarship?" "Yeah," Linda continued. "He overheard some staff talking about a program for youth. It's a scholarship for gifted students, and he filled out the application on his own. He listed you as his guardian, and he's asking if he could be considered for the grant." Arthur's mind raced. Caleb had done what? Without asking for permission, without help, the boy had filled out a scholarship application. It wasn't just that Caleb had taken the initiative, it was the fact that he believed in a future. He believed he could have a chance at something better. "I'm on my way," Arthur said, his voice thick with emotion. He couldn't believe it. Caleb had made it happen on his own. Arthur had always tried to offer Caleb stability, but here the boy was, taking matters into his own hands, using what little he had to change his future. Within a month, Caleb was accepted into a boarding school for gifted youth, a place where his potential would be nurtured and his future brightened. The scholarship covered everything: tuition, housing, everything Caleb needed to succeed. Arthur couldn't believe it. He had never expected this. He had simply tried to offer kindness, to give the boy a chance. And somehow, Caleb had turned that into an opportunity for himself. At the farewell ceremony, as Arthur stood in the back of the room, watching Caleb prepare to leave, the boy approached him, a small hand-drawn card in his hand. Arthur's heart clenched as Caleb handed it over. Inside, the simple words were written in careful handwriting. "You saw me when no one else did. You gave me a chance to be something more." Arthur felt his eyes sting with tears. He had never expected to save a life. He had never expected to be this important to someone. All he had wanted to do was offer a little kindness, a little bit of warmth to a boy who had been through too much already. But in the end, that small act had been enough to change everything. As Caleb boarded the bus to his new school, Arthur stood alone in the parking lot, watching the bus drive away. The boy had gone from being a stranger in need to someone Arthur would never forget. And Arthur knew deep down that the world had changed, just a little bit, because of Caleb and because of one quiet gift. Disclaimer: the story you just watched is fictional, created to highlight the profound impact of compassion and generosity. Its purpose is to raise awareness, promote empathy, and encourage meaningful discussions about kindness, resilience, and the transformative power of selfless acts.